The story of Adam and Eve has become an inversion of its original interpretation. It's been used for 2,000 years to justify sexual shame, the subordination of women, and the idea that humans are fundamentally broken. It all goes back to one man in the 4th century who essentially rewrote what that story originally meant. And the entire Western world eventually just accepted it. My primary source today is Elaine Pagels, professor of religion at Princeton, one of the most respected New Testament scholars alive today, and her book, Adam and Eve and the Serpent. If you want to go deeper, that's a good place to start. For the first 3 centuries of Christianity, we're talking roughly from 30 CE to 300 CE, there was no unified interpretation of what the Garden of Eden story meant. Early Christians read it in wildly different ways. Some read it as a story of human freedom. The capacity to choose good or evil was seen as the thing that made human beings dignified, not a flaw but a feature. Eve reached for knowledge. That was human and bold. Some early Christian thinkers saw the story as an affirmation that God created humanity with genuine moral agency. And that agency was something to be celebrated, not mourned. The Gnostics read the whole thing as an inversion. The serpent wasn't the villain. The serpent was wisdom. Eve was not the weak link. Eve was the awakened one. The God who said, "Don't eat it," was the villain, trying to keep humanity ignorant and controllable. These readings were not considered fringe. These were very much a live, competing interpretation within early Christian communities. Augustine of Hippo, born 354 CE, brilliant, tortured, and deeply preoccupied with his own sexuality, which, if you read his Confessions, he basically tells you all about it himself. Augustine developed what became the doctrine of original sin, and his version of it was specific and extreme in ways that even other Christians at that time found alarming. His argument was that when Adam sinned in the garden, that sin did not just affect Adam. It corrupted human nature itself, permanently, biologically, and that corruption is passed down through sexual reproduction. Every human being born since is already found guilty, already broken, already deserving damnation before they've done a single thing. And the mechanism of transmission, sexual desire, the lust involved in reproduction is itself the carrier of sin, which means sex, even within marriage, even for procreation, carries this taint. This is where Western Christianity's obsession with sexual shame comes from. Not from Jesus, not from the early Christians, but from one man's theology, developed in the late 4th and early 5th century, that became orthodoxy through a series of church councils and political maneuvering. Pagels is careful to show this was not inevitable. It was contested. A theologian named Pelagius pushed back and said humans retain free will and moral capacity. We aren't condemned from birth. Augustine had him declared a heretic. Augustine won, and we've been living in that victory ever since. Augustine was writing in the early 5th century, when the Roman Empire had recently become officially Christian under Constantine. The church and the empire were now entangled, and Augustine's theology was very convenient for imperial power. If humans are fundamentally corrupt, if we can't trust our own reason, our own moral instincts, our own capacity for self-governance, then we need external authority. We need the church. We need the empire. We need someone else to be in charge of our broken, sinful selves. A theology of human freedom, the kind early Christians had, is dangerous to empires. It says people can govern themselves. It says human reason and conscience is trustworthy. Augustine's theology said the opposite, and the empire found that very useful. In Augustine's framework, Eve becomes the archetype of dangerous feminine desire. She's the one who was deceived. She's the one who led Adam astray. And she's the reason we're all in this mess. This wasn't just a theology, it was the perfect template. It gave intellectual and spiritual justification for the subordination of women in the church and in society. If the first woman was the vector of humanity's downfall, what does that say about women's leadership, women's voices, or women's authority? But here's what Pagels points out. That reading required choosing to emphasize certain elements of the text and ignore others. Earlier readers did not automatically land there. Some read Eve as the courageous one. Some read her choice as the birth of human consciousness. The demonization of Eve, similar to the demonization of Lilith, we'll talk about next time, like the suppression of the goddess tradition, it was not obvious, it was a decision. The idea that human beings are fundamentally sinful and broken, and that sex is shameful, and that a woman's curiosity is dangerous. No, this is not an ancient, timeless truth. That is one man's theology from the 4th century, whose ideas were turbocharged by imperial power and calcified into doctrine.